Thank you for joining us. Welcome to Business Incorporated. I'm Chimize Obi Iwago. On the show today, Nigeria signs disaster funding deal at the ongoing Africa Development Bank meeting. Lafarge Africa seeks to boost profit and cut debt burden by 2020. Plus, Kenya plans to overhaul legislation governing its financial sector. We start off the program with the markets, and here in Africa, only the market in Egypt was trading in the positive at intraday. The EGX index was up 0.17%. Looking at other numbers there, Nigeria Stock Index and South Africa's JSE were both in the red, while Kenya closed negative on Wednesday. And in the Middle East, most of the markets moved towards the positive direction, with Dubai amusement park operator DXB Entertainment continuing a rebound from record lows in heavy trade. At intraday, the strength of DXB Entertainment helped the Dubai Stock Index rise 0.26%. In Abu Dhabi, the index climbed 0.34% as energy investment firm TAQA jumped 6.6%. Qatar was up 0.55%. The Saudi index was down 0.07% on profit-taking in some banks. In Europe, markets rallied in early trade as investors monitor the bounce across financials and tech stocks. Europe's autos stocks led the losses, down over 1.4% following news overnight that the U.S. government plans to launch a national security probe into auto imports. Janelle has details. Let's cross over now to Frankfurt. Hello, Janelle. Good afternoon. Well, we guess we don't have Janelle right now, and we hope to get across to her as soon as possible. In the U.S., stock index futures pointed to a mixed open as investors monitored a fresh batch of corporate earnings and economic data. At around 4:15 a.m. Eastern Time, Dow futures slipped 4 points, indicating a slightly downbeat implied open. The Nasdaq and S&P 500 futures pointed to a flat start to the session for their respective markets. The moves in pre-market trade came at a time of worsening friction between the United States and China amid ongoing trade talks. In data, existing home sales data for April are due to be published at around 10 a.m. Eastern Time, followed closely by the Kansas City Fed Manufacturing Survey for May. All right, we cross over now to Frankfurt as Janelle is ready to talk to us. Good afternoon, Janelle. Good to have you on the show.
Hello.
Now, let's start off with the announcement of the U.S. auto import probe, which brought down car maker shares today. Walk us through the reactions in Europe.
Well, remember that Trump has made these sorts of threats before. He has threatened before to put tariffs on EU cars, and this appears to be a step for him towards making those threats a reality. But at the same time, the timing is also kind of odd because it follows from news of China agreeing to meet him halfway and lowering its auto import tariffs from 25% to 15%. So that's this is a weird time for him to make that announcement. So although this had been predicted for some time, there's been quite a backlash. We've heard, for example, from the likes of the German the Chamber of Commerce and Industry that they called it almost a provocation, and they said that to use national security as a justification, of course, is completely constructed. Well, you know, they mean contrived or made up and also far-fetched. Similar sentiments from European Commission officials who said that such a step would be in violation of World Trade Organization rules, and that they just found the step in itself just very difficult to understand. Now, we saw car maker shares down in Asia, but that's because a lot of the cars that are imported in the U.S., most of them actually come from Asia. But for the EU, the U.S. is still the largest export market for European cars. Last year alone, about 25% of cars exported from the European Union landed on American shores, with just over half of them being from German car makers. So this is definitely something that has caused a lot of consternation here and threatens to put further strain on a U.S.-EU relationship already strained from the last weeks from other geopolitical issues like Trump pulling out of the Iran deal. So in that light, none of this has been particularly helpful.
Now, the ECB policy meeting is ongoing, and the guardians of the Eurozone have an eye on Italy. The Prime Minister-elect is selecting his team this week. How is the ECB preparing?
Well, as you said, they are going to have to keep a close eye on Italy. The good news is that they have experience with this sort of thing. They have experience with burgeoning sovereign debt crises, with the idea of a populist government making ambitious promises to the electorate while ignoring fiscal rules and running up a deficit. That is something that the ECB has quite some experience with by now because of Greece. Now, the ECB itself will be in wait-and-see mode. At the moment, this is most of all a political question, and the ECB will not intervene until there's been a certain kind of deterioration in the situation that would have a concrete impact on the rest of the Eurozone members. Now, the ECB, of course, is still buying up Italian debt under the quantitative easing program, and that is allowing it some time in order to see how things develop in Italy. Now, it can only react to developments until it has to. So their stance so far has been only to say that Europe's fiscal rules have to be followed. Now, if we get to a situation where the fiscal implosion of Italy actually does happen, the ECB still has some tools in its arsenal. For example, with the last resort being a program called the outright monetary transaction program, or the OMT program. So you have to imagine bond buying in hyperspeed. Of course, analysts are divided as to whether this would actually be a possibility for them. The problem is that normally it's never been used before, but it's meant for cases where a Eurozone country has actually been complying with the rules, but it finds itself having to be in a position to defend itself against attacks, for example, external attacks from speculative investors. So following the rules would not result in this situation for Italy, but I guess if the time comes, and nobody hopes that time will come, we will have to see what the ECB will do then.
Well, I guess everybody will have to be on a wait-and-see mode.